Revolution Radio. The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and FreedomSlips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, FreedomSlips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Hello and welcome back to Dave and Mac showing us another second hour on this fine day, June 25th, 2023. This is show number 589. I think 980 and 500, and we're going to go into the unseen. The unseen. Again, it was all about all the things that we cannot see or perceive of, right? That are beyond our sensory range, if you will. And not just sight, but generally speaking, of course, sight being the most important one for us. Now, where were we exactly? I've got a marker here at other traditions, or did we do? I think no. Okay, so I'm going to start at the top. Now, we spoke about the Tower of Babel, and we did so because the Tower of Babel was destroyed. And we raised the question, is it possible, in light of the revelations on Skinwalker Ranch, that the inhabitants of each... Should we not do that again? This is really interesting. We can do that, though, if you want.
Yeah, well, that's where we're at, because I put a marker there.
Okay, so last week we spoke about the parallels between the Tower of Babel myth, the language confusion, and other things. It was important, like I said, because the Skinwalker Ranch program showed a structure about 30 feet above the ground, which only showed up for a couple of frames in a 1,000 frames a second kind of high, also slow-mo kind of camera, a high-speed camera. Is it possible that these traditions are going back to a time when we tried to build such a structure to reach whatever there was? Because it seems that there are structures in the sky above us, portals or otherwise, that we cannot reach in any other way. So now this comes then to the next point: lands in the sky and the earth. Are they cloaked? The idea of floating islands and floating cities isn't a new one. In fact, humans have been talking about distant lands and floating civilizations since time immemorial, and they even show up in some of today's best-known myths from the ancient world. Okay, and look. Recently, and this is really what started this whole show, there were some reports about cities in the clouds that seem to appear, in China specifically. Right? And this is actually how we started the show cycle with these reports. Is it possible that there are, in fact, things in the sky, all the time, but we only get to see them once in a while, and not just in the sky, but elsewhere. But of course, being in the sky, that's specifically fascinating. Floating civilization, floating islands, and the thing is this: the atmosphere, okay, is very, very deep, tens of kilometers, tens and tens of kilometers, and we see only very small sections of the atmosphere. It's a lot of cloud cover, and if you had technology that would render you cloaked or invisible, with light bending around your structures, for example, then you would never be seen. It could still be there. It could be there, but you don't see it. I mean, there could be 1,000 floating cities above us right now, but we would never know it because our level of tech doesn't let us detect them. And it also would explain, to some extent at least, how these UAPs or UFOs pop in and out of existence. Because they just go into a cloaked structure, they come out of a cloaked structure, in and out. Could still be portals. I'm not saying they're not, but I'm saying it's a definite possibility, right? Why don't you tell us about, and this is really interesting, Dave, Aeolia, because that actually has parallels to other things as well.
Absolutely. So just before I say it, I'm going to say that David Grush talked about this, and it's been known in UFO folklore for a long time, and that is that there are trans-dimensional beings that may actually inhabit the same space that we are in, but they're out of phase, and we can't see them or touch them. They might live on the same planet as us, but out of phase, or a planet that's like ours, occupying the same. Maybe it's the Earth in another dimension that we don't see. Right? So that's and I keep coming back to the Watchers in my mind.
Oh, yeah.
I keep thinking about that.
Yeah. Well, that makes perfect sense. That makes sense.
You could. What was that Star Trek episode too, where they had a cliff face and it was rendered on the outside, but they could see through it.
Yeah, absolutely. That was in fact one of the movies.
Yes, that's right.
Insurrection or something, or whatever.
Yeah.
And yeah, absolutely. Look, and that's look again. Yes, most of the world's problems have been solved in science fiction.
There you go. Who doesn't love science fiction for that reason? All right, Aeolia, a land that could control the four winds. After Odysseus's narrow escape from the Cyclops in Homer's epic Odyssey, they sailed on to reach Aeolia, which floated above the sea with steep cliffs of bronze with a palace on top. Odysseus and his crew were warmly welcomed and given a bag which trapped all the winds, except the desperately needed west wind to carry them home. Wow. The Laestrygonians are a race of giant cannibals. And would you like to read the aside, Mickey?
Sure. Look, this is interesting because we had parallel stories of North American natives. Now, remember, this is the Odyssey and such. That's Mediterranean myth, Greek myth. But we also have stories of native North Americans about giant cannibal races, red-haired, and they also were associated with the Earth Mound culture. So there are parallels. So not just cannibals, but cannibals that were also giants. We're going to go into that at some other point, but I thought this was a really interesting call-out.
Well, the red-headed ones, they were also the gods as far as the South Americans were concerned, the Peruvians. So they are also the offspring of Poseidon's son, Laestrygon. Odysseus' ship has previously been attacked by Poseidon. Odysseus then encounters Polyphemus, son of Poseidon. Polyphemus is the one-eyed god of the sea who manages to trap Odysseus in his cave. To escape, Odysseus applies the man-eating giant with wine. Oh boy, I know where this is going. And then blinds Polyphemus by stabbing him in his single eye with a burning stake. Oh, that didn't go the way I wanted. Enraged, Polyphemus has asked his father to seek revenge against Odysseus, even though Odysseus and his fleet have had several previous encounters with Poseidon and his family. The Laestrygonians proved to be the deadliest of opponents. Meki.
Odysseus' arrival in the land of the Laestrygonians. Aeolia, the island kingdom of Aeolus, the ruler of the winds, visited by Odysseus in Homer's Odyssey. And in the Odyssey, Aeolia was purely mythical, a floating island surrounded by a wall of unbreakable bronze where the cliffs run up sheer. Now you can imagine a floating island that is made of copper, or at least it would be quite the sight to behold. And I find it interesting that bronze or copper I mentioned here specifically, because it could have been gold, because bronze has this golden sheen to it. Anyway, After the encounter with the Polyphemus, a god named Aeolus, who serves as king of the floating island of Aeolia, summons up a wind to carry Odysseus and his men back to Ithaca. He also gives Odysseus a bag that contains all the winds. But Odysseus, who suspecting the bag actually contains treasure, rip the bag open and release all the winds. He is blown back to Aeolus' kingdom on the island of Aeolia once again, but this time he doesn't want to help Odysseus. As a result, Odysseus and his 12 ships have to row rather than sail to the land of the Laestrygonians. The ships pass through a narrow entrance to find a harbor surrounded by rocky cliffs. All the ships tie up close together inside the harbor, but Odysseus keeps his ship outside the harbor at the end of a point. Odysseus climbs a high rock to reconnoiter, and when he sees smoke in the distance, he sends 3 people to investigate. Dave?
Devoured, speared, and sunk, the 3 men encounter a woman who is fetching water from the fountain Artacia. When the 3 scouts ask for the king, the young woman directs them to her father and to Fate's home. At the king's house, the men are terrified when they see that his wife is a giant. She summons him, who begins killing and eating the men. Then he calls others who join in the massacre. Thousands of Laestrygonians, ogres, not men, appear to begin to throw huge rocks and boulders from the cliffs at the ships in the harbour below. They spear the men who fall from the ships and take them home to eat them. Eventually, the Laestrygonians sink 11 ships. Becky.
And that is the story of Odysseus and his encounter with the floating island. Again, I'm fascinated by the connections to North America and the red-haired cannibals that the North Americans encountered.
Mm-hmm.
Tir na Nog. You might have heard of Tir na Nog. Probably have. It's a mythical kingdom, a kingdom of internal goodness. Somewhere between the vast Atlantic and the Gaelic otherworld is the mythical Irish floating island of Tir na Nog, a paradisiacal land of the young, where eternal youth, beauty, health, and abundance are given. Anyone who visits remains eternally young, but if they touch mortal earth again, they will age immediately and often horribly. Other old Irish names for the other world include Tir Terniger, land of promise, or the promised land; Tir Fortuin, land under the wave; Magwell, plain of delight, or delightful plain; Ildatach, multicolored place; and Emain Ablach, the Isle of the Apple Trees. Similar myths in the northern Celtic cultures includes our Anwen, Fairyland, Avalon, and High Brazil, Dave.
Tir na Nog is depicted as an island paradise and supernatural realm of everlasting youth, beauty, health, abundance, and joy. Its inhabitants are described as the Tuatha de Danann, or the warriors of the Tuatha de Di. I don't know how to pronounce that. The gods of pre-Christian Ireland, who engage in poetry, music, entertainment, and the feast of Goibni, which grants immortality to the participants. In the Extra adventure and Imran voyage tales, various Irish mythical heroes visit Tir na Nog after a voyage or an invitation from one of its residents. Pardon me, I'm going to sneeze. Pardon me.
Bless you.
Oh, I sneezed last night. I got a bleeding nose from it. This time I'm safe. This time I'm safe.
Good man.
They reach it by entering ancient burial mounds or caves, by journeying through the mist, by going underwater, or by travelling across the sea for 3 days on an enchanted boat, or Manannan's horse. The tales of mortals who visit the other worlds are referred to as Extra adventures, and Bailey visions or ecstasies. Is that right? Looks like it. The path across the sea is called Mag Mell, Plain of Honey. It is the golden path made by the sun on the ocean to travel far over the green meadows of the waters where the horses of Lear have their pastures. The god that rules this region is said to be the first ancestor of the human race and god of the dead, and in the surviving tales is always named Manannan, MacLear. In the tales, Manannan is usually described as a warrior and is sometimes accompanied by his golden-haired wife or daughter, who sometimes wears a golden helmet. Tir na Nog is described as a beautiful place, a forested wilderness or flowery meadow, but it is usually dangerous or hostile to human visitors, such as Ossian, Dieramud, the Fianna, the king of Greece, who remain on the island for a period of time that is typically a multiple of 3 days or 3 years. The women of Tir na Nog are very beautiful and may be the only residents, and sometimes leave to visit mortal men or otherwise establish a presence. There is a salmon-inhabited well or fountain in Tir na Nog that is found near an enormous tree or grove of 9 hazels, or a lady's bower, where bloom was on every bough and the air heavy with the sweetness of orchids. And a lake area, perhaps Dulcinea. Typically, an enormous tree lies at the center of the island, and birds singing beautiful music in its branches are stated in the X-tray to be the souls of the dead. A drinking horn suspended near the well or an enchanted cup is also present in some of the tales, along with a silver branch containing golden apples. Perhaps even somewhere an enchanted herb or a false war. There are cities and fortresses made of precious metals and feather thatch in Tir na Nog, although their exact number is not clear. In some stories, there is a multicolored flowered plain full of bees in or underneath the forested wilderness of Tir na Nog, and a parting is sweet as honey and maybe forever. Mickey.
I find these stories absolutely fascinating. The next one is slightly different. These are the dancing islands in Pliny the Elder's natural history. Now he was not a I guess a writer of fiction so much, but he actually wrote a whole bunch of what we would call today, scientific texts, etc. Anyway, as one of Rome's foremost authors, historians, and statesmen, Pliny mentioned several floating islands within present-day Italy. One, he wrote, was pushed from place to avoid wars. Pliny also wrote about the dancers, islands believed to move when a special chorus was sung, along with 2 more islands driven around a lake by the wind. And just on that, in Papua New Guinea, in order to escape headhunters and cannibals, they found a group of people. This is not a recent thing, but they found a group of people that had built floating islands. Their villages essentially were just these floating islands that would keep them away from cannibals and headhunters and such. So I think obviously they were floating on the water, not in the air, but the concept is not bad. But if you had the tech, so that it seems that in ancient times people went 2 ways. One was underground, and we have ample evidence for tunnels and underground cities. I mean, cities of tens of thousands, in fact, of people. What if you had the tech that allowed you to float? How much better would that be?
Oh, 100%.
Right? In fact, Battle Angel Alita, that's sort of predicated upon that premise, where there is, in fact, a floating city. where I guess the elite lives, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
and they sort of lord it over the people on the ground, which is a fascinating story. Which brings us, of course, to High Brazil, Dave.
Brazil is also known as High Brazil and several other variants. It is a phantom island said to lie in the Atlantic Ocean west of Ireland. Irish myths described it as cloaked in mist, and except for one day, every 7 years, when it becomes visible but still cannot be reached. Becky.
The etymology of the names Brazil and High Brazil is unknown, but in Irish tradition it is thought to come from the Irish Ui Brasil, meaning descendants, for example, the clan of Brasil. So, the descendants of Brasil. Still don't know where that came from. One of the ancient clans of northeastern Ireland. And also, Bres means, in Old Gaelic, beauty, worth, great, and mighty. Despite the similarity, the name of the country Brazil, Portuguese Brazil, has no connection to the mythic islands at all.
Mm.
So, although Tolkien does link it, it's not true. The South American country was first named Ilha de Vera Cruz, Island of the True Cross, and later Terra de Santa Cruz, Land of the Holy Cross, by the Portuguese navigators who arrived there. After some decades, it started to be called Brazil due to the exploitation of native Brazil wood. At that time, the only export of the land. In Portuguese, Brazil wood is called pau Brasil, with the word Brazil commonly giving the etymology red like an amber, formed from Latin brasa amber and the suffix il from iculum or ilium. Dave.
Wow, the appearance on maps. Nautical charts identified an island called Brasail, west of Ireland, in the Atlantic Ocean as far back as 1325. In a Portaland chart by Angelino del Cert, it appeared on the Catalan Atlas in 1375. Later it appeared in Insula de Brazil in the Venetian map of Andrea Bianco in 1436, attached to one of the larger island of a group of islands in the Atlantic. This was identified for a time with the modern island of Terceira. No, that's not right. Terceira in the Azores, where a volcanic mount at the bay of its main town, Angora do Heroísmo, is still named Monte Brazil, or Mont. A Catland chart of about 1480 labels two islands, Ilha de Brazil, one to the southwest of Ireland, where the mythical place was supposed to be, and one south of Ilha Verde, or Greenland. On maps, the island was shown as being circular, often with a central strait or river running east-west across its diameter. Despite the failure of attempts to find it, this appeared regularly on maps lying southwest of Galway Bay until 1865, by which time it was called Brazil Rock.
Interesting, isn't it?
Downgraded.
Yeah, I know. It's no longer a planet. The search for the island, interesting as well. Expeditions left Bristol in 1480 and 1481 to search for the island. And a letter written by Pedro de Ayala shortly after the return of John Cabot from his expedition in 1487 reports that land found by Cabot had been discovered in the past by the men from Bristol who found Brazil. In 1674, a Captain John Nisbet claimed to have seen the island when on a journey from France to Ireland, stating that the island was inhabited by large black rabbits and a magician who lived alone in a stone castle. Yet the character in the story were literally mentioned by Irish author Richard Head. Broderick O'Flaherty, in a chronographical description of West, or H. La Connaught, 1684, tells us there's now living Moro Oli, who imagines he was personally on all Brazil for 2 days and saw out of it the Aran Islands, Gollum Head, Eros Begil, and other places of the West continent he was acquainted with. High Brazil has also been identified with Porcupine Bank, a shoal in the Atlantic Ocean about 200 kilometers west of Ireland, and discovered in 1862. As early as 1870, a paper was read to the Geological Society of Ireland suggesting this identification. The suggestion has since appeared more than once in an 1883 edition of Notes and Queries. Now, bearing in mind, again, if we think about this for a second, the whole point of this is that these islands aren't always visible. And in fact, maybe sometimes the islands are, in fact, on the water, but maybe they are able to be cloaked on the water, or maybe they have to float up to be cloaked. I find the, because the thing is, if they keep going to look for it. You know, if it was a pure fantasy, then would you do that? I don't know. But why don't you tell us about Kunlun?
Kunlun, yes. The Kunlun, simplified Chinese, traditional Chinese, is pinyin. Kunlun wades gills. Kunlun or Kunlun Shan is a mountain or mountain range in Chinese mythology, an important symbol representing the axis mundi and divinity. The mythological Kunlun is based on various sources, mythological and geographic, of the modern so-called Kunlun Mountains of the Tibetan Plateau and Mount Kailash as an archetypal omphalos. The term Kunlun has also been applied to Southeastern Asian lands or islands and seemingly even Africa, although the relationship to the mountains is not clear beyond the nomenclature. That's it. In any case, Kunlun refers to distant, exotic, and mysterious places. Different locations of Kunlun have been ascribed in the various legends, myths, and semi-historical accounts, which it appears. These accounts typically describe Kunlun as the dwelling place of various gods and goddesses, where fabled plants and mythical creatures may also be found. Many important events in Chinese mythology were based around Kunlun. Kunlun Mountain has been described in various texts as well as being depicted in art. Sometimes Kunlun appears as a pillar of the sky or earth, sometimes appearing to be composed of multiple tiers with the commonality of mystery and grandeur or magnificence. Great words. Being emphasized in its mythological descriptions. The base of Kunlun Mountain is said to penetrate far into the earth, while its above-ground part proceeds into the sky. Well, that's the definition of a mountain. In general, accounts emphasize the difficulty of access to the mountain and, even more strikingly, its hallowed places. To its surrounding waters and steep cliffs of immense heights, Kunlun typically also has a strong association with various means to obtain immortality or longevity. Poetic descriptions tend to lavish Kunlun with paradisiacal detail. Gem-like rocks and towering cliffs of jasper and jade, exotic jewel plants, bizarrely formed and coloured magical fungi, and numerous birds and other animals, together with humans who have become immortal beings. Sometimes it is the 8 immortals who are seen, coming to pay their respects to the goddess Zhuangmu, perhaps invited to join her in a feast of immortal repast. This is one well-worn image or motive that is frequently painted, carved, or otherwise depicted in the material arts. Meki.
Indeed. Mount Penglai. Penglai, Immortal Island, is a legendary land of Chinese mythology. It is known in Japanese mythology as Horai. According to the classic of mountains and seas, the mountain is located at the eastern end of Bohai Sea. According to the pre-Qin mythology, which retells the legend of Zhu Fu, presenting a memorial to the Qin emperor in order to seek for the elixir of life. We've actually spoken about that in the past. There are 3 godly mountains which are found in the Bohai Sea where immortals reside. These mountains are Penglai, Fangzhang, and Jingzhou. Other islands where immortals reside are called Daiyu and Yuanjiao. In the illustrated account of the embassy to Goryeo in the Zhuanghe era, Zhuanghe Fengshi Guali Dujing, written in 1124 by Zhu Jing, Mount Penglai is located on an inhabited island which is found within the boundaries of Changguo Prefecture and can be reached after crossing 30,000 leagues of the weak water. Various theories have been offered over the years as to the real location of these places, including Japan, Namhae, Gyeonggi, Jeju-do, south of the Korean Peninsula, and Taiwan. Penglai, Shandong, exists, but its claimed connection is as the site of departures for those leaving for the island rather than the island itself. In his work Tengji Ko, which means a guide to select villages, Yi Chung Huan, a Joseon period geographer, associated Mount Penglai with Korea's Mount Kumgang. Okay?
In Chinese mythology. Now, Qi is Qi, isn't it?
Qi, that's right.
Yeah. In a legend originating in the state of Qi during the pre-Qin period, I guess that, immortals live in a palace called the Penglai Palace, which is located on Mount Penglai. In Chinese mythology, the mountain is often said to be the base for the 8 immortals. Oh, here it comes again, Maggie. Or at least where they travel to have a ceremonial meal. As well as the illusionist and Kui Cheng, supposedly everything on the mountain appears pure white, while its palaces are made from gold or silver and jewels grown on trees. There is no agony and no winter. There are rice bowls and wine glasses that never become empty, no matter how much people eat or drink from them. And there are enchanted fruits growing in Penglai that can heal any ailment, grant eternal youth, and even resurrect the dead. Historically, Qin Shi Huan, in search of the elixir of life, made several efforts to find the landmass where the mountain is located. To no benefit. Legends tell Zhu Fu, one servant sent to find the island found Japan instead and named Mount Fuji as Penglai.
In Japanese mythology, from the medieval periods onwards, Mount Penglai was believed by some Japanese people to be located in Japan, where Zhu Fu and Yang Guifei arrived and eventually decided to stay there for the rest of their lives. The presentation of Mount Horai in Lafayette Hearn's Kwaidan Stories and Studies of Strange Things differs from the earlier Chinese legend. This version rejects much of the fantastic and magical properties of Horai. In this version of the myth, Horai is not free from sorrow or death, and the winters are bitterly cold. Hearn's conception of Horai holds that there are no magical fruits that cure disease, grant eternal youth, or raise the dead, and no rice bowls or wine glasses that never become empty. Rather, Hearn's incarnation of the myth of Horai focuses more on the atmosphere of the place, which is said to be made up not of air, but of quintillions of souls. Breathing in these souls is said to grant one all of the perception and knowledge of these ancient souls. The Japanese version also holds that the people of Horai are small fairies, who they have no knowledge of great evil, and therefore their hearts never grow old. In the Kwaidan, there is some indication that the Japanese hold such a place to be merely a fantasy. It is pointed out that Hora is also called Shinkiro, which signifies mirage, the vision of the intangible. And I actually highlighted this here because this is important. The vision of the intangible. So Shinkiro doesn't really translate as mirage, but rather as the vision of the intangible or the sight of something that can't be seen. Right? And I think, well, since this is the topic of the whole thing that we're sharing with you here, this is really, really important to understand. I really strongly believe, before we go into the next section, which is Laputa, by the way, which is a nice little cap. It is the world that we live in is very different in reality to what we've been taught. There are creatures and portals and hidden places and connections to other places that we simply don't come across normally. And if we do, we're usually lost. I mean, lots of people get lost all the time. We don't like to admit that, but it's a fact. You can stand on your head. But it does happen. And I think it comes through sometimes in fiction, sometimes otherwise. But the next bit here is my favorite floating island of all, which is Laputa. Why don't you go ahead and then get us started on Laputa? I think we can actually finish it off today.
Wow. Okay. My time starts now. Laputa. Gulliver discovers Laputa, the flying island, and I've pasted the illustration into the chat so they can see what we're talking about. Nice. Laputa is a flying island described in the 1726 book Gulliver's Travels by Jonathan Swift. It is about 4.5 miles or 7 kilometers in diameter, with an adamantine base, which its inhabitants can maneuver in any direction using magnetic levitation. The island is the home of the king of Balnibarbi. There we go. And his court, and is used by the king to enforce his rule over the lands below. Laputa was located above the realm of Balnibarbi, which was ruled by its king from the flying island. Gulliver states the island flew by the magnetic virtue of certain minerals in the grounds of Balnibarbi, which did not extend to more than 4 miles above and 6 leagues beyond the extent of the kingdom, showing the limit of its range. The position of the island and the realm below is some 5 days' journey south-southeast of Gulliver's last known position, and it's 46 north, 180 degrees east, i.e. east of Japan, south of the Aleutian Islands, down a chain of small rocky islands. Wow.
It's quite specific. The island of Laputa is described as being exactly circular and about 4.5 miles in diameter, giving an area of roughly 10,000 acres. The island was 300 yards thick and comprised the bottom plate of adamant 200 yards thick as well, above which lay several minerals in the usual order, topped with a coat of rich mold 10 or 12 feet deep. In shape, the upper surface sloped down from the circumference to center, causing all rain to form rivulets into the center, where 4 large basins, 800 meters across, and 200 yards from the absolute center. In the center of the island itself was a chasm 50 yards in diameter, continuing down into a dome extending 100 yards into the adamantine surface. This dome served as an astronomical observatory and also contained the lodestone, which enabled the island to fly and move above the realm.
Inhabitants. Laputa's population consists mainly of an educated elite who are fond of mathematics, astronomy, music, and technology, but fail to make practical use of their knowledge. Servants make up the rest of the population. Laputans have mastered magnetic levitation. They also are very fond of astronomy and discovered 2 moons of Mars. Wow, that's extraordinary, Mackie.
Oh, yeah. No,
this is 151 years earlier than the recognized discovery of the 2 moons of Mars by Asaph Hall in 1877. However, they are unable to construct well-designed clothing or buildings, as they despise practical geometry as vulgar and mechanic. The houses are ill-built, lacking any right angles, and the clothes of Laputians, which are decorated with astrological symbols and musical figures, do not fit, as they take measurements with instruments such as quadrants and a compass rather than with tape measures. They spend their time listening to the music of the spheres. And they believe in astrology and worry constantly that the sun will go out. Many of them have heads angled to one side. They often suffer from strabismus. One eye turns inward and the other looks up to the zenith. Conditions that Swift uses to mock the microscope and the telescope. Laputans are described as becoming so lost in thought that they cannot focus their attention on the conservation or avoid running into a tree or falling into a ditch unless periodically struck by a bladder full of pebbles or dry peas carried by 1 or 2 flappers, or, in their native language, Klimenols hired for this purpose. Laputa is male-dominated society. Wives often request to leave the island to visit the land below. However, these requests are almost never granted because the women who leave Laputa never want to return. The Laputan women are highly sexed, having an abundance of vivacity and adulterous, and, whenever possible, take on lovers out of visitors from the lands below. The Laputan husband, who are so abstracted in mathematical and musical calculations, might assume their wives are adulterous, but so long as they have no flapper around, they won't notice the adultery, even should it occur right before their eyes. Mackie.
And this is where it gets interesting. And again, this is actually where Swift describes Phobos and Deimos. Jonathan Swift, as you know, the Irish author, makes reference to 2 then undiscovered moons of Mars. This was so he published Gulliver in 1726. The astronomers on the flying island of Laputa, says Gulliver, have discovered 2 lesser stars or satellites which revolve around Mars, and wherefore the innermost is distant from the center of the primary exactly 3 of his diameters, and the outermost 5. The former revolves in the space of 10 hours, and the latter in 21.5. When the 2 Martian moons, Phobos and Deimos, were eventually found by Asaph Hall at the U.S. Naval Observatory, the orbits proved to be quite similar to those described in Swift's novel. Phobos is actually 6,000 kilometers from the surface of Mars and revolves around Mars in 7.7 hours, whereas Swift gave it 13,000 kilometers in 10 hours, respectively. Deimos averages 20,000 kilometers from Mars and orbits about 30 hours, and Swift gave him 27,000 kilometers in 21.5 hours, respectively. So, yes, not 100% correct, but not too far out.
That's close.
And what is interesting that he specified the 2 moons.
Yes.
So, it's, again, you have to read Swift in the original. It's not as a child story in order to fully appreciate him. But I wonder how much of Laputa as an island, or in fact any of the places that Lemuel Gulliver traveled to, his protagonist, are in fact reflections of actual places that Swift might have heard about from travelers and navigators and seamen and such ship crews. He was actually a clergyman, believe it or not. He had some fairly interesting ideas about the world, way ahead of his time, in my opinion. But is it possible then, to go back to the original point of the cycle here, is it possible that there are places in the world which are cloaked from our view, both in the atmosphere as well as on the ground and in the oceans, right? And why would we be so averse to that postulation? Because of course it goes against everything we think we know. But again, the movement and appearance as well as disappearance of UFOs, other phenomena, Bigfoot, etc. The loss of people in plain sight, right? And then the sudden reappearance of stuff they had, even though places have been searched, it speaks to portals, gateways, hidden places, cloaked places, maybe places that can only be seen under certain conditions. Maybe the light has to be just so. Maybe the weather has to be just so. And like I said, with the Skinwalker Ranch, this thing that had an effect on the rockets they shot up, right? 30 feet off the ground, which isn't really that high if you think about it. They caught it. For a fraction of a second, there was an image. Okay. And then I guess, the tech resumed its operation. But even if the tech had failed at some point, if we assume that the speed with which this image appeared and disappeared went completely unregistered to the naked eye. Even normal video you would never have picked up. You needed a high-speed camera.
That's right, dedicated. Yeah, that's right.
100%. And who knows how much around us goes on. Imagine if we could put these high-speed cameras around us all the time. And this brings me back, and this is something we didn't actually talk about, but I wanted to raise as an aside. Jose Escamilla's, he didn't come to prominence with his Mars pictures. He actually came to prominence with the discovery of the rods. And
his moon pictures.
Sorry, moon pictures. It's actually the rods that he first claimed.
That's right.
And these are creatures that move so fast, and there are videos where you can see them move.
Yeah.
And these are not insects that are fluttering, in front of the lens, but these creatures move so fast that between one frame and the other, they're gone of normal video. That is. But you can see where they're going. In some instances, it was a cave. A guy was just walking, and then this thing was moving so swiftly, it never registered, right?
Yeah.
So there may be a whole ecosystem of creatures, and I'm not talking about things that we can see. Of course, the things you can see, they're still fast. You can't see the wing of a hummingbird. You can't see the wing of a bee. You can't see any of these things. They're there because you can see the bee. The bee itself moves at a speed that we can actually see. The wings do not. What if they're creatures that move faster than the beat of a hummingbird or a bee? Right? What
totally possible.
Things, right? And the funny thing is this, the most impressive thing I ever saw from a slow motion perspective is, or not really slow motion, this is more like a still photography that is over time, and then you just look at it as an ongoing picture, is the Earth itself. The shrinking and expansion of the ice, the polar caps, the growth of the forests, the cloud cover, etc. It looks as though the Earth is either breathing or has a heartbeat. It looks organic, but of course we would never perceive it because it's just too big. But if you can take a look from the outside, which we can now with satellites, and take a picture of the Earth that way and look at it over the period of, 1, 2, 5, 10 years, whatever, you will see that the Earth seems like one gigantic organism that appears alive. But again, it's outside the range of our perception. It's like an ant sitting on your kitchen stove, it's too that the structure in which it finds itself as a house built by humans would be completely lost on the end.
Mm-hmm.
In a similar fashion, we find ourselves in a world where most structures are completely lost to us. I mean, you saw the superstructures of the universe, right? Where galaxies are seen to be forming clusters and networks. From what
That's right.
It looks really interesting. I mean, it looks obviously it's organic. It looks organic, right? It looks like something.
It looks like the structures of the brain, dude. To be honest, yeah,
100%. But of course, we can't possibly conceive of it because it's too big. In fact, unless we have the level of tech that we have, which we do have, we would never be able to see it and fully appreciate it. Right? It would be completely lost to us, like the ant on the couch. Like the ant. Imagine the ant looking at the house. Let's assume the ant can realize that I'm on kitchen top counter in a house. How would it then be possible for the ant to deduct anything about human civilization? We're completely beyond the ant. I mean, we're stretching the ant already with understanding it on the countertop, right?
And it would be marveling over the smoothness of the countertop.
Yeah.
Compared to the environment that it's used to.
Yeah. How did they do it? Magical. Let's look at what they could do.
This isn't ant-made. There must be...
That's exactly.
Right, like human. This isn't human-made, right? No, this isn't ant-made. No, I think I've discovered something brand new.
Yeah, yeah. And forget the rest of human civilization altogether. Completely incomprehensible. You haven't even got a chance.
Mm-hmm.
Not even.
So to be anthropomorphical.
Yes, that's right. Very nice. But yes, absolutely. Right. So and here we are sitting yet again, trying to figure out what's what and looking at the world, and we're looking at structures, and we decide what Occam's razor is. We decide what the most sensible explanation is, right? The simplest explanation. When we know for a fact, Dave,
mm-hmm.
that we have no idea how the universe really works. I mean, the thing is this: in order to come up with the simplest explanation, you have to have a pretty good understanding of what's what.
Mm-hmm.
You do. Otherwise, I mean, what do you base it on? But with dark energy and dark matter, that ship sailed. You add quantum mechanics into the mix, we have no idea what's going on. I mean, none.
No.
We'd like to think we do. Yeah. But honestly, you really, really don't.
Hey,
no.
No, my daughter had some friends around. They've written a script for a thing they're doing, and they were filming it yesterday, and set up all the lighting and the green screens and everything for them for their chroma key, and so then they could do whatever they wanted. I didn't take part. I didn't do anything else rather than just being a grip, trying to help them out construct their studio. And when they were all going home, some of the kids left at different times, and the two left behind last, I subjected them to the double slit experiment.
Oh, nice.
But I used that.
They're not going to be back.
Yeah, good luck with that. And it was the cartoon version because it was simplified for them and they could understand it within their range of thinking as a 14-year-old. And I said, just think about it. I'm not asking you to try and work it out. Just understand how crazy this is. You ready? Hold on. All right, and I pushed play. It's on YouTube. You can find it. And it was really interesting. And their parents arrived just when it concluded. And I don't know. I heard. I think I meant, like their brains exploded. And we'll see. One was very interested in science, so maybe that's that game changer moment where they've just. I think they can pursue something.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I said, just forget about this macro world that we live in where everything is solid and it just appears solid, but you know that there's gaps between all the atoms, that it is the tension between them is what prevents our hand going through anything, right?
Mm-hmm.
I said, but this is different. When you get down to a level where you're just throwing electrons at a screen and you get, instead of two painted lines, you get an interference pattern, which means the electron is turned into a wave to go through both. But if you look to see which one it goes through, I said it goes back to two painted lines on the wall. And she's like, what? I said, no, it's nearly 100 years old, this experiment, and, do research it. And I was really pleased to have been able to have a conversation.
Nice. That's nice, dude. That's good.
She might make a difference in the world, She's a good kid, so very smart.
That's really good. That's nice. Like I said, I mean, what can you ask for, really, right?
Remember, I'm still talking to my physics professor.
That's nice.
I mean, we're still friends on Facebook, right? And I always postulate stuff to him.
He goes, "You're crazy, Dave."
Yeah, he does.
I like you're crazy.
Well, my brand of crazy is trying to push the envelope, right? And he always said that I had some kind of weird gift that I already understood what was going on. So I wasn't great at the math, but I'm more the Tesla kind of guy. Experiment. Hey, that's the end of the show.
It is indeed, my friend.
Goodness me. Look, next week we'll come back with a brand new topic. And in the meantime, you can catch us at 7 a.m. both Tuesday and Thursday mornings in the US, Eastern. And until then, stay safe. And if you're going to keep listening, Jer Bear has his awesome show coming up next called After Hours. Take care.